what if, um, what if the absolute fastest way to destroy your career and like lose your power and just completely ruin your life is to be a genuinely good person?
Well, that's definitely not what they teach you in kindergarten.
Right. I mean, from the time we're little, we're handed this very specific social contract. Play fair, tell the truth, be kind.
Yeah. Society constantly reinforces this idea that moral integrity isn't just, the right way to live, but that it's actually the ultimate engine for lasting success.
Exactly.
It's basically the fundamental promise of almost every philosophical or ethical framework we're raised with, like, do good and you will eventually do well.
The universe will reward your virtue.
Right. Or the market will, anyway.
But then, you look at history,
Mm-hmm.
or you look at highly competitive environments today, corporate boardrooms, high-stakes politics, just anywhere the power is seriously contested.
And suddenly that script feels incredibly naive.
It really does. You start noticing that the people who actually rise to the top, the ones who really shape the world around you, they rarely act like saints.
Not at all. In fact, it seems like they're reading from a completely different sort of hidden rule book where morality and success are actually in direct conflict.
And that conflict is exactly what we're exploring today on this deep dive. We're looking at the mechanics of power through the lens of history's most notorious pragmatist, Niccolò Machiavelli.
Yes.
We're pulling from his infamous treatise, The Prince, along with a really fascinating, lesser-known biographical work he wrote called The Life of Castruccio Castracani.
It's a great companion piece.
It is. So our mission for this deep dive is to examine a deeply uncomfortable premise. The idea that in a ruthless world, playing by the moral rules is, well, essentially a form of self-sabotage.
Yeah, we're stripping away all those idealized fantasies of how we wish people behaved. We're going to look at human nature exactly as it operates in the real world, especially when the stakes are literally survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Machiavelli, he just goes straight for the throat of traditional ethics right out of the gate.
He really does.
He points out what he considers to be this fatal flaw in human thinking.
Yeah.
Like, we focus entirely on how a person ought to live, and in doing so, we completely ignore how people actually live.
It's a profound reality check. In Chapter 15, he argues that a person who wishes to act entirely up to their professions of virtue will quickly be ruined among so many who are not good.
Wow.
Ruined!
Yeah. Basically, if you're surrounded by wolves, acting like a perfect, innocent sheep isn't a moral victory. It's just a very quick way to get eaten.
Right.
Therefore, he says, anyone seeking to maintain their position has to literally learn how not to be good. And crucially, to use that knowledge according to necessity.
It's like, okay, think of a boxer stepping into the ring, expecting this highly civilized, heavily regulated sparring match.
Right.
But then he realizes his opponent has brought a crowbar and, bribed the referee.
That's a great way to picture it.
If you stubbornly stick to the Marquis of Queensberry rules while the other guy is swinging a metal bar at your head, you aren't being noble, you're just choosing to lose. What's fascinating here is that Machiavelli isn't necessarily telling you to be a comic book villain. I mean, that's the biggest misconception about his work.
People always assume he just wants everyone to be evil.
Right, but he's doing something much more radical than that. He is entirely separating effectiveness from ethics. He forces you to ask whether clinging to your moral high ground is actually just a form of vanity.
Vanity.
I
mean, that hurts to hear, but I get it. Because if you refuse to do what's necessary to protect your state or your company or your team, just so you can keep your own conscience perfectly clean.
You're prioritizing your self-image over the survival of the people relying on you.
Exactly. And we see this embodied perfectly in the other source we're looking at today, The Life of Castruccio Castracani.
Oh, yeah. Castruccio's story is wild.
He was a literal foundling.
Yeah.
Like a baby discovered abandoned in a vineyard who somehow rose from absolutely nothing to become the Prince of Lucca in the early 14th century.
And Castruccio understood this exact separation of ethics and effectiveness intuitively. I mean, he didn't have the luxury of a noble birth or a huge inheritance.
No, he had to scrap for every single inch of power.
Right. And he openly stated that it was the victory that brought the glory, not the methods of achieving it. He used fraud whenever it was advantageous.
And never felt bad about it.
Never. He didn't feel a shred of guilt because the outcome, securing his territory and protecting his loyalists, completely justified the deceit in his eyes.
So if we accept that the moral high ground is actually a disadvantage, the first casualty in this ruthless world has to be the truth. Like, how does a leader weaponize honesty?
Well, Machiavelli brings up this amazing metaphor from antiquity to explain it.
The centaur.
Yes, the centaur. He notes that ancient heroes were given to Chiron the centaur, who is half man, half beast, to be educated.
So what's the takeaway there?
The lesson is that a successful leader must know how to use both natures. You have the laws of men, which are rational and bound by rules, and then you have the force of the beast, which operates on pure survival instinct.
But he refines that beast metaphor even further, doesn't he?
He does. He says that within the nature of the beast, you can't just be one animal. You have to adopt the traits of two very specific animals, the fox and the lion.
Because, as he says, the lion is defenseless against snares or traps, and the fox is defenseless against wolves.
Exactly.
So you have to be a fox to recognize the traps, and a lion to terrify the wolves. People who rely simply on being the lion, just, using brute force and intimidation all the time, they don't really understand what they're doing.
No, they don't, because brute force is predictable.
And predictable people can be trapped.
Precisely. You must be the fox to navigate the deception of others, which means you yourself must be a master of deception. He states bluntly that if all men were good, telling the truth would be the right move. But because men are generally bad and won't hesitate to break their word to you when it suits them, you are under absolutely no obligation to keep your word to them.
Wow. And the historical example he uses here is Pope Alexander VI, which is just wild.
Oh, he loves Pope Alexander for this.
Machiavelli writes that this pope, he did nothing else but deceive men. And basically never even thought of doing anything else.
Yeah.
His entire reign was built on making these solemn promises and immediately breaking them.
But the crazy part is, his deceits always succeeded perfectly because he understood human gullibility.
He knew exactly what people wanted to hear.
Yeah, Pope Alexander recognized that people desperately want to believe in authority and in promises of stability. He totally weaponized the moral weight of the papacy.
Okay, hold on, though. I have to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
If you're constantly playing the fox-like, breaking treaties, lying to your allies, acting like Pope Alexander, doesn't your reputation eventually just completely collapse?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, why wouldn't everyone just stop taking your calls? You can't lead if literally nobody believes a single word you say.
This raises an important question, and it really gets to the core of Machiavellian psychology. His counter-argument is all about the mechanics of perception.
Okay.
He argues that it isn't necessary to actually have all the traditional virtues like mercy, faith, humanity, religious devotion.
You don't need them?
No, but it is absolutely essential to appear to have them.
Men judge by the eye, not the hand. That line from chapter 18 is just incredible.
It really is. Everyone can see what you appear to be, but very few people ever get close enough to touch who you actually are.
That's so true.
The masses are always taken in by appearances and by the outcomes of things. As long as the result is successful, as long as the economy holds, or the city is defended, or the company turns a profit, the general public will forgive almost any deception.
So they basically retroactively justify your methods because they're benefiting from the result.
Exactly.
So the illusion of integrity is actually more powerful than real integrity because the illusion can be adapted, while actual integrity locks you into a single course of action.
That's the danger of being rigid.
Which brings us to another massive moral hurdle: compassion. If honesty is just a flexible tool, what about empathy? Like when you're managing the people below you, do you want them to love you or do you want them to be terrified of you?
The classic management dilemma from chapter 17.
Loved or feared.
And Machiavelli's answer is, again, stripped of all sentimentality. He says that in a perfect world, you would be both loved and feared.
But it's not a perfect world.
Right, because it is almost psychologically impossible to unite those two emotions in one person at the same time. It is vastly safer to rely on fear.
And he paints a pretty bleak picture of why that is. He basically argues that human beings are naturally fickle, cowardly, and driven entirely by self-interest.
He really didn't have a high opinion of people.
No. He says when times are good and danger is far away, they will offer you their loyalty, their property, even their lives. But the second real danger approaches, they will completely abandon you.
Because love is just a bond of obligation.
And people will happily break an obligation the moment it becomes inconvenient for them.
But fear is different. Fear is preserved by a dread of punishment that never fails.
You can control fear.
Exactly. You cannot control love. And he contrasts two real-world examples to really drive this home. First, he looks at the people of Florence.
Right, the situation with Pistoia.
Yes. The Florentines wanted to maintain this reputation for mercy, so they refused to intervene aggressively in the neighboring city of Pistoia. They just didn't want to look like tyrants.
And what happened?
Because of their hesitation, Pistoia was completely destroyed by factional rioting.
So their so-called mercy literally resulted in absolute slaughter.
Exactly. It was disastrous. Then he looks at Cesare Borgia, who was universally considered cruel.
Like notoriously cruel.
Yet Borgia's ruthless, swift cruelty brought peace to the Romagna region, ended the gang warfare, and actually restored loyalty to the state.
It's kind of like pulling off a Band-Aid versus peeling it slowly.
That's a good way to put it.
If you tear it off all at once, there is a sharp, terrible shock, but the body immediately starts healing and adapting to the new reality. If you peel it slowly, trying to be gentle, the wound stays fresh, the pain lingers, and the patient learns to deeply despise the person causing that lingering pain.
That analogy perfectly captures Machiavelli's concept of cruelty properly used versus cruelty badly used, which sounds like an oxymoron, I know.
Yeah, properly used cruelty.
But it's a cold mathematical calculus. Cruelty, properly used, is applied all at one blow, strictly out of necessity to secure your position, and then it is never repeated. You consolidate the pain.
Right, he gives the brutal example of Agathocles the Sicilian in Chapter 8. This was a man born a simple potter's son, who rose through the military but had absolutely no royal blood to secure his claim to Syracuse.
So what does he do?
He calls the Senate together, and at a predetermined signal, his soldiers just slaughter all the senators and the richest oligarchs in a single morning.
Just wipe them out.
Yeah. Or Oliverato da Fermo, who invited his own uncle and the chiefs of his city to a solemn banquet, only to have soldiers burst from a secret room and murder the entire guest list.
It is a terrifying logic, but Machiavelli points out that after those horrific, concentrated acts of violence, both men ruled securely and largely in peace.
They didn't have to keep oppressing everyone.
Right. They didn't bother the general public after that. Badly used cruelty, on the other hand, starts small and just multiplies over time. It keeps the population in a constant, lingering state of anxiety and resentment.
Okay, but doesn't ruling by fear and committing these massive acts of violence inevitably cross the line into making people hate you? Because, I mean, if your own people hate you, they'll eventually conspire to destroy you no matter how terrified they are.
That is the vital distinction for Machiavelli. You must be feared, but you must never be hated.
Never hated.
Fear ensures compliance. Hatred guarantees rebellion. And Machiavelli observes that avoiding hatred is actually surprisingly simple.
Really? How?
Keep your hands off their property and keep your hands off their women.
Oh, wow. He explicitly says that men will more quickly forget the death of their own father than the loss of their patrimony, like their inheritance and their livelihood.
Right. As long as you don't arbitrarily seize their wealth or violate their personal honor, the vast majority of citizens just want to go about their lives.
They don't really care who is in charge.
Exactly. They will accept a terrifying, distant ruler as long as their day-to-day existence is stable and their property is secure.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, because we've been talking a lot about the theory of this. We need to look at how this ruthless calculus operates in the real world when survival is absolutely on the line.
The ultimate case study.
Yes. The ultimate masterclass in the source material is Cesare Borgia at the town of Senigallia.
This incident is basically the pinnacle of Machiavellian tactics.
Set the scene for us.
So Borgia, who is also known as Duke Valentino, was facing an existential threat. His own mercenary commanders, these powerful aristocratic families like the Orsini and the Vitelli, realized Borgia was just growing too powerful.
Oh, they turn on him.
Yep. They formed a union called the Diet of Magione and launched a full-scale rebellion against him. Borgia was suddenly outgunned, his armies were depleted, and his territory was in revolt.
Now, a conventional leader would have tried to fight a defensive war or perhaps begged for foreign intervention.
Which would have been a disaster.
Right. Borgia realizes he can't win by playing the lion, so he becomes the ultimate fox. He doesn't show anger, he shows deep understanding. He feigns reconciliation.
It's so manipulative.
He reaches out to the rebel leaders and offers them these incredibly lucrative new contracts. He plays perfectly on their greed and their desire to return to a comfortable, profitable status quo.
He manipulates their own self-interest against them, so he invites them to the town of Senigallia to celebrate this new peace treaty. And the psychology of this is just brilliant. The rebel leaders want to believe they've won. Of course they do.
They want the lavish gifts and the security Borgia is promising them.
And because they want to believe it, they drop their guard entirely. To show good faith, they even dismiss their own main armies from the town to make room for Borgia's men.
A fatal mistake.
Huge mistake. They ride out to greet him with just a small escort. Borgia greets them with overwhelming warmth, rides into town with them, and invites them into a private chamber in his quarters to finalize the paperwork.
And the moment the doors close, his men seize them.
Just like that.
That very night, Borgia has the leaders of the rebellion strangled.
He orchestrated an elaborate peace treaty just to execute them without a battle. I mean, it is staggering cold-bloodedness.
Look at the outcome through Machiavelli's lens. To him, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a triumph of extreme efficiency.
Right, because of what it prevented.
Exactly. By lying, Borgia solved a massive political and military crisis in a single evening. He neutralized the leaders of the rebellion with zero collateral damage to the civilian population of the region. Because fighting an honorable open war against the Orsini would have devastated the countryside.
It would have starved the peasants, bankrupted the state, everything. A single devastating act of calculated fraud was infinitely more effective and arguably more merciful to the general public than a drawn-out war.
We see that exact same mechanism in our second source with Castruccio Castracani.
Yes, he was a master of this too.
Castruccio was constantly outnumbered by the armies of Florence. He couldn't win fair fights, so he lured the Florentine army into a narrow valley at Senigallia, securing the high ground beforehand, and totally crushed them in an ambush.
Or at Fucecchio.
Yes, at Fucecchio, he feigned a terrified retreat, drawing the enemy cavalry into the treacherous, muddy waters of the river where they bogged down and were completely slaughtered. He embodied the fox.
So we've established the toolkit. You play the fox and the lion. You use cruelty effectively. You prioritize the appearance of virtue over actual virtue.
Sounds like a winning formula.
But if you master all of this, are you guaranteed to win? Machiavelli says no.
Wait, really? After all that?
Because even the most brilliant, ruthless tactician is still subject to the one variable no human can fully control: fortune.
Chapter 25. This is a massive philosophical shift in the text. He admits that fortune, chance, the shifting winds of the times, unpredictable events controls about half of our actions.
Yes. He compares fortune to a raging, flooded river. When the river bursts its banks, it sweeps away trees, destroys buildings, and tears up the earth. Everyone flees before it. No one can stop it when it's raging.
But the key to that metaphor is what happens before the flood, right?
Exactly. During calm weather, men have the agency to build dams, dig canals, and construct barriers. So when the flood inevitably comes again, the waters are channeled. The force of the river is managed and becomes less destructive.
You cannot control the weather, but you can control your preparation.
But his concept of fortune goes far beyond just building up your treasury or your army. It gets deeply into human psychology. He argues that the absolute secret to surviving the whims of fortune is the ability to adapt your very nature to the times.
He uses the example of Pope Julius II, who is known as the warrior pope.
Julius accomplished incredible things because he went to work impetuously and fiercely in all his affairs. He succeeded because his bold, aggressive nature perfectly matched the chaotic, fast-moving circumstances of the era he lived in.
But Machiavelli points out the fatal trap. If the times had changed and suddenly required caution and diplomacy, Julius would have been completely ruined.
Because he couldn't adapt.
He would not have been able to change his fundamental nature. And this might be the hardest lesson in the entire deep dive.
It really is.
It's hard enough to swallow the idea of compromising your morals to win. But Machiavelli is saying you can't even get comfortable with your new ruthless persona. You have to be a total chameleon.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this exposes the ultimate weakness of so-called good people in Machiavelli's framework. The problem isn't just that they are nice, it is that they are hopelessly rigid. Yeah, moral integrity, by its very definition, relies on universal, unchanging rules. You believe you must tell the truth, always. You must play fair, always.
But the real world doesn't care about your universal rules. The world is chaotic, and the context is constantly shifting.
Exactly. The cautious person, when the moment demands reckless adventure, hesitates and is ruined. The violent person, when the moment demands subtle diplomacy, strikes out and is ruined.
So to survive and thrive, flexibility and adaptability must absolutely trump ideological purity. You must be able to shift from the lion to the fox, from mercy to cruelty, from cautious to impetuous, exactly as the winds of fortune dictate. It is a dizzying, deeply cynical way to view human interaction. I mean, throughout this text, Machiavelli has essentially been holding up a mirror, forcing you to ask what you truly value more. Do you value the feeling of moral superiority, or do you value actually getting things done?
He paints a picture of a world where deciding to act like a sheep among wolves isn't a badge of honor, it's an abdication of responsibility. It forces a profound reevaluation of what we even consider a virtue. And there is one final fascinating paradox from the text that completely flips our traditional understanding of goodness upside down.
What's that?
Consider what he writes in chapter 16 regarding liberality and meanness, essentially, generosity versus stinginess.
We're universally taught that a good leader, a good person, should be generous and open-handed.
Right. But Machiavelli explains the hidden trap of generosity. If you try to be known as a generous, good leader, you will quickly drain all your resources to keep up that lavish reputation. You'll give away your wealth to please the crowd.
Which makes sense.
But eventually, your treasury will be empty. And to maintain your power and continue funding that appearance of generosity, you will have no choice but to start heavily taxing your subjects.
Oh, wow.
You'll have to extort money from them and confiscate property.
So you essentially have to rob the very people you were trying to be good to in the first place.
Precisely. Trying to practice traditional goodness ultimately forces you to commit the greatest evils against your own people, turning you into a hated tyrant.
That's insane.
Conversely, if you simply accept the reputation of being stingy and mean from the very beginning, your treasury remains full.
So when a crisis hits, or a war starts,
You can defend the state without burdening your citizens with new taxes. Your meanness is exactly what allows your people to live in peace and security.
wow. So it leads you to ponder this incredibly uncomfortable idea. Is it possible that in the pursuit of power and stability, effectiveness isn't just a grim substitute for virtue, but is actually the only true virtue there is?
It's a heavy thought.
Just let that sink in for a minute. That social script we were all handed as kids, the rule book of unyielding fairness and absolute honesty. Maybe the people who told us to follow it weren't actually trying to make us successful.
Maybe they just want to make sure we were predictable.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the conventional wisdom around you, and we will see you next time.